The desert dawn had a way of fooling people. Its soft peach light made everything look gentler than it truly was: the red rock cliffs, the dry riverbeds, even the miles of dust that stretched toward the horizon. But Clara May Hollis had lived long enough in these lands to know better. Beauty here was a thin veil stretched over danger. And that morning, as she stood beside the smoking remains of her barn, she knew danger had finally caught up with her for good. The wind carried the smell of charred timber and scorched hay. Clara wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders, though the chill that gripped her had nothing to do with temperature. She could still hear the men's laughter fading into the night, the same men who'd ridden up to her homestead demanding she hand over her late husband's claim. When she refused, they didn't argue. They simply torched what she owned and promised to return next time. "We'll burn more than the barn," their leader had said. Tipping his black hat, Clara had waited until their silhouettes vanished into the darkness before letting her breath break. Now, hours later, with the sky warming and the fire nearly dead, she knew she had no time left. Staying meant dying or worse. Running was the only choice a woman alone could make. She packed fast. A carpet bag with a few dresses, a Bible, her mother's brooch. The small tin box her husband had died protecting, she didn't dare open it, didn't dare let it out of her sight. Then she saddled the only creature she had left, a stubborn old mule named Hickory, whose bones showed more than his muscles. But he had carried her through many hard days, and she prayed he had a few more in him. By sunup, Clara was riding west, the desert swallowing her tracks as quickly as she made them. But fear rode with her. She kept glancing over her shoulder, expecting to see black hats cresting the hills. Every sound made her jump: a rattlesnake's hiss, a distant hawk's cry, even wind brushing against the sagebrush. "Keep steady, Clara May," she whispered to herself, gripping the reins tighter. "Widows don't get the luxury of falling apart." Hours passed. Heat rose off the land like breath from a furnace. Hickory plodded on, but Clara could feel him weakening. By noon, the old mule stumbled, once, twice. On the third stumble, he collapsed entirely, sending Clara tumbling into the sand. She pushed herself up, coughing dust from her lungs, and scrambled to Hickory's side. The mule's breaths were ragged, his eyes dim with exhaustion. "No, no, no," she murmured, stroking his neck. "Hickory, not now. Not when we're so close." Close to what? She didn't know. A town, a trader's post, a miracle, anything that could keep her ahead of the men hunting her. But the mule didn't rise. His body slackened, and Clara felt a new kind of fear settling in her chest. Without him, she was just a speck of dust in an unforgiving sea of rock and sky. She closed her eyes and prayed, not for safety, but for direction, for any sign that she wasn't meant to die out here alone. When she opened them, she wasn't alone. A shadow stretched across the sand beside her. She froze. Slowly, she lifted her head. A man stood a few paces away, silent and unmoving, like he had stepped out of the desert itself. Taller than any man she'd ever seen, with broad shoulders wrapped in worn buckskin. His hair hung in dark waves to his shoulders, and his skin bore the sun-warmed bronze of a life lived in open country. His expression was unreadable, and though his hands were empty, he radiated the kind of calm strength that made Clara's breath catch. Every warning she had ever heard about warriors from the desert tribes thundered in her ears. She didn't know what tribe he came from, only that he wasn't a settler. And that meant she had no idea whether he was friend or threat. Her voice trembled despite her efforts. Who are you?" For a moment he didn't speak. Then, in a deep, quiet tone that seemed to settle the air around them, he said, "My name is Cale. You should not be alone out here." Clara swallowed hard, unsure whether to run, plead, or pray. But Cale took one step closer. His gaze steady. "The riders behind you," he said. They are coming. You do not have much time." Her blood turned to ice. He knew, and somehow that terrified her more than the burning barn. The empty desert, or the men who wanted her dead. The desert had never felt so still. Clara stood frozen beside her fallen mule, her breath trapped somewhere between her lungs and her throat. Cale, the giant stranger with the unreadable eyes, watched her without moving, as though measuring her fear, weighing it against something only he understood. He didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't step closer. He simply existed there, an unshakable pillar in a world that had been unraveling beneath her feet for months. You know about the riders?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Cale nodded once. "Their tracks crossed the ridge behind you, fresh, too fresh." Clara's heartbeat kicked faster, almost painful. She twisted to look over her shoulder, expecting to see them crest the hills at any moment. But the horizon lay empty, shimmering with heat. "How do you know they're hunting me?" she pressed, her hands tightening on her shawl. Cale's gaze lowered to the scorched edges of her dress soot from the burned barn, still clinging to the hem. Then to her carpet bag, hastily packed, dust-stained, half open. Then to the mule, collapsed from exhaustion. "A woman running alone," he said simply. "A barn burned. A mule pushed beyond its strength. I do not need more than that." Clara swallowed hard. His voice wasn't accusing, only observant, deep, steady. She hated that it made her want to believe him, a stranger. "Why are you out here?" she asked. "This stretch of land is empty for days." Cale tilted his head slightly, as though deciding whether she deserved the truth. "I live in these canyons," he said. "Alone." There was a weight behind that word alone that made Clara's stomach twist. He didn't seem like someone meant for solitude. And yet he stood there with the posture of a man who had long accepted it. Before she could ask more, Cale's attention shifted sharply toward the east. His shoulders tensed. A small dust plume curled upward in the far distance, almost invisible unless one knew exactly what to look for. Clara's breath stuttered. "Is that?" "Yes," he said. "Riders." The world began to tilt. Her knees wavered. If Cale hadn't noticed, she might have crumpled into the sand. The realization hit her all at once. They were too close. She would never outrun them on foot. Cale stepped toward her then. Slow, deliberate, like someone approaching a frightened creature that might bolt. "You cannot stay here," he said. "I don't." Her voice cracked. "I don't have a horse." "I do." She flinched when he motioned behind him, but forced herself to look. A massive horse, dark, muscled, restless, stood tethered beneath a crooked juniper tree. Clara had seen cavalry mounts before, but this one was bigger, broader, built for rough country and steep passes. The kind of horse that needed a strong hand. The kind of horse she had never ridden in her life. "I can't," she whispered, shaking her head. "I'll fall. I'll slow you down." Cale held up a hand, not to silence her, but to steady her. "My horse can carry the both of us," he said. "But he will not let you mount unless you trust him." Clara looked at the animal's size again. Her stomach dropped. "He's too big. I can't even get my foot in the stirrup." Cale stepped closer, his shadow falling over her. "Then you will let me help you." She took an instinctive step back, fear and pride and habit colliding in her chest. She didn't let men touch her, not strangers, not anyone. And Cale wasn't just a stranger. He was a man of the desert tribes. A figure settlers whispered about in cautionary tales, but the dust plume was growing. And Cale was right. She didn't have time. He extended his hand, not grabbing, not forcing, just offering. "If you stay," he said quietly, "they will catch you. If you ride with me, you will live." The wind shifted. The smell of distant smoke drifted faintly across the desert. Clara closed her eyes for one trembling heartbeat. When she opened them, Cale was still there, patient as stone. She exhaled shakily. "All right, just tell me what to do." Cale's expression softened by a fraction approval or relief she couldn't tell. He nodded once and guided her toward the horse with slow, confident strides. "Place your hands here," he said, positioning her fingers on the saddle horn. "Keep your foot steady." Clara tried. Her boot slipped on the first attempt, her breath catching in frustration. Cale stepped behind her, his voice calm. "Do not fear the height. Sit steady. I will lift you." Before she could protest, his hand circled her waist gentle, not restraining, and he lifted her as though she weighed nothing at all. Clara's breath rushed from her chest, half fear, half something she didn't yet understand. Her body settled into the saddle. The horse shifted beneath her, powerful, sure-footed. Clara clung to the horn, trembling. Cale moved to the front of the horse, placing one hand on its neck. The animal instantly calmed. "You are safe," he said, and for the first time since the night her barn burned. Clara felt like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't running alone anymore. Clara had never been atop a horse so tall in her life. From the saddle, the ground felt impossibly far away, as if the earth had dropped out from under her. Her hands clamped around the horn, knuckles white, while her heartbeat thudded unevenly against her ribs. The animal beneath her shifted its weight, powerful muscles rippling beneath its dark coat, reminding her of just how small she was compared to everything happening around her. Cale checked the cinch, tightened the strap, and tugged gently on the reins before looking up at her. "You sit well," he said. Clara let out a nervous laugh. "I'm shaking so hard I'm surprised I haven't rattled right off." Cale's mouth curved, not quite into a smile, but enough to make her blink in surprise. "Fear is not weakness," he said. "Only the sign you still want to live." He swung up behind her in one fluid motion, his weight settling the horse. Clara stiffened immediately. His presence at her back was enormous, warm, steady. She could feel the heat of him through her dress, the controlled strength in the way he held the reins just past her shoulders. She felt caged and protected all at once, a confusing sensation that made her breath come unevenly. Cale clicked his tongue softly, and the horse began moving, first at a slow walk, then faster as they crossed the hard-packed desert floor. Clara swallowed. "Do you know a place we can hide?" "Yes," Cale said, "but we must reach the canyons before the riders do. The stone there will swallow our tracks." She nodded, though her throat was tight. She didn't dare look back. She didn't want to see the dust clouds rising behind them, didn't want to measure how close death was. But the fear pressed at her spine like cold fingers anyway. Cale must have sensed it. "Look forward," he murmured, "not behind. The past cannot follow if you keep moving." The words hit deeper than he probably intended. Clara did as he said and focused ahead. The land stretched wide and endless, red mesas glinting under the sun, spires of rock rising like the backs of ancient creatures, scattered junipers bending with the wind. Beautiful, terrifying. "How did you know they were after me?" she asked quietly. Cale's hands tightened slightly on the reins. "Men who burn what they want cannot be trusted. Men who hunt a woman alone less so." "It's because of the land," Clara whispered. "My husband, he left me a claim. A small one, but good water runs through it. Those men believe it should belong to them." Cale was silent a long moment. Then he said, "Water is worth more than gold in this country. Worth killing for." Clara stared down at her hands. "You're not wrong." They rode in silence for several minutes, the horse's gait steady and rhythmic. Sweat trickled down Clara's back from the heat, but Cale sat behind her as calm as if they were strolling through a shaded meadow. When she finally gathered the courage to glance at the horizon over her shoulder, she froze, A thin plume of dust rose at the far edge of the desert, larger than before. "Cale," she whispered. "I see them. They're closer." Yes, his calmness should have comforted her. Instead, it made her wonder what kind of life he'd lived to bear danger with such steadiness. The horse responded to his slightest touch, stretching into a faster run. Wind pulled Clara's hair loose from its pins, whipping strands across her face. She squinted against the sting of dust. How far to the canyon? She shouted over the wind, "Not far." Cale leaned slightly, guiding the horse toward the east. "We must cross the dry wash before they reach the ridge." The wash was a deep scar in the earth, narrow, steep-sided, filled with loose sand that could swallow a horse's hooves if the rider wasn't careful. Clara's breath hitched as they neared it. "We can't cross that." Cale's hand came to her arm, steadying her. "Do not fear. This horse knows the ground." Clara squeezed her eyes shut as they plunged down the slope. The horse's hooves skidded on the loose dirt, sending small cascades of sand sliding past their legs. The descent was fast, jarring, and Clara felt her stomach lift into her throat. But Cale's arm held her firm, keeping her balanced at the bottom, the ground leveled. The horse surged forward again, climbing the opposite bank with sure-footed strength. Clara let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "I thought we were going to die." "You thought wrong," Cale said simply. When they reached the top of the wash, Cale finally risked a glance behind them. Clara did too. The riders were now four dark shapes on fast-moving horses, headed straight for the wash they just crossed. Clara's pulse pounded. They're going to catch us." "No," Cale said. "They will try, but the canyon will protect us." He leaned forward, his voice low and unshakable. "Hold to the saddle. The ground ahead is rough." Clara did as he said, and together, with danger closing in behind them, they raced toward the narrow stone throat of the canyons where safety or death waited. Depending on who reached it first. By late afternoon, the heat of the desert had softened into a muted glow as the sun dipped toward the horizon. Clara's arms ached from gripping the saddle horn for so long, her thighs stiff from holding herself steady on the enormous horse. Sweat and dust clung to her skin, leaving her dress damp and uncomfortable. She had expected to collapse at any moment, yet Cale's steady presence behind her kept her upright. His silent reassurance somehow more powerful than words. The narrow entrance to the canyon finally appeared, a jagged slit of shadow cutting through the sun-baked cliffs. The air grew cooler as they approached, carrying the scent of earth and hidden water. Cale guided the horse carefully, keeping them close to the canyon walls where the riders would be hardest pressed to follow. The ground was uneven, littered with loose stones and twisted roots. Clara's stomach lurched with every careful step, but Cale's hand occasionally brushed hers at the reins, a small anchor in the whirlwind of fear and exhaustion. This is safe?" she whispered, though part of her feared the canyon might conceal more dangers than it revealed. "For now," Cale said, his voice low and calm. "The walls here will hide us until dark. Once the sun sets, they will not know which path to take. Only I do." Clara's eyes scanned the canyon walls, half expecting to see the riders already upon them. But the narrow rock formation swallowed the landscape behind them. The dust trail that had followed for hours vanished into a maze of shadows and rock. For the first time in days, Clara allowed herself a trembling sigh of relief. They came to a small ledge where the horse could rest, and Cale dismounted first, moving with the quiet agility of a man who had grown up among cliffs and canyons. Clara slid down, legs trembling, barely able to keep her balance. Her dress was torn and dusty, her hair falling in wild strands around her face. Yet despite the fatigue, the terror of the past hours, she felt something she had not felt since her husband's death, the faintest flicker of hope. Cale led her deeper into a hidden alcove behind a large boulder. It was a small natural shelter, protected from the wind, the sun, and the gaze of anyone who might have been hunting them. A thin trickle of water ran nearby, a creek fed by a hidden spring. Clara crouched beside it, letting the cool liquid trickle over her hands, washing away some of the grime and fear. Cale moved to the horse, brushing it down and checking its legs and hooves. Even in motion, he carried the aura of someone accustomed to survival in a harsh land. Clara watched him quietly, noticing the scars on his forearms, the steady way he breathed, the muscles that worked without strain. He wasn't imposing in a threatening way, he was commanding because he belonged to the desert, as much as the rocks and the sun itself. "You ride well for someone so frightened," he said without looking up. His voice, low and calm, reached her across the small space, carrying an odd comfort. Most women would have fallen long before the wash. Clara's lips pressed together. "Most women aren't running for their lives," she said softly, though she could feel her voice shaking. She did not want to appear weak in front of him, even though she owed him her life. Cale finally turned toward her. "You are alive. That is enough for now. Tomorrow we can plan." She met his eyes, and for a brief moment, something unspoken passed between them. A recognition that neither was alone, not truly. The fear, the danger, the unknown, they were facing it together. That thought alone made her pulse quicken in a way that wasn't entirely from adrenaline. The shadows lengthened, and the canyon darkened, wrapping them in silence. Clara thought of the riders in the barn, of everything she had fled, and the weight of it all pressed down on her. Yet Cale's presence grounded her. She no longer felt entirely untethered in a hostile world. Cale knelt by the horse, murmuring to it in a language she didn't understand. The animal responded, calm and obedient. Clara realized that he had a way with not just her, but the land itself, the horse, the desert. Even the wind seemed to answer him. She felt a strange longing to know him, to understand how a man so powerful could carry such quiet gentleness as the sun sank completely behind the canyon walls. Cale made a small fire using stones and dry brush, careful to keep the smoke low. Clara watched him work silently, the glow flickering across his face, softening his otherwise stern features. She felt warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. It was a dangerous warmth, one that made her want to speak to him, to ask questions she wasn't sure she was allowed to. Instead, she stayed quiet, letting the sound of the canyon and the crackle of the fire fill the space between them. Yet in that quiet, something shifted. Fear had not vanished. She would never forget the threat of the riders, but it was no longer the only thing she felt. Hope, curiosity, and a strange flicker of trust began to settle in her chest, mingling with the tension, binding her to the man who had saved her. As they slept on opposite sides of the small alcove, Clara felt the desert close around them like a protective. Clara followed his gaze, seeing the winding path through the canyon, the twisted shadows hiding rocky outcrops. "And if they find us?" she asked, her voice tight. Cale's eyes met hers, unwavering. "Then they will find me first. I will not let them touch you. This is my oath." Hearing him speak so plainly, with such unwavering certainty, Clara felt a strange relief. She had spent months running, hiding, fearing every shadow. Now, she realized she had someone in her corner, someone who would not hesitate, who would act, who would fight for her without question. The realization brought an unexpected wave of emotion, trust. Raw, vulnerable, and entirely new. She swallowed hard, trying to control the tremor in her voice. "Thank you," she said softly. Cale gave a short nod, acknowledging her words without any trace of pride or arrogance. "No thanks needed. Surviving in this land often depends on keeping your promises. You trust me. I trust myself to keep it." That is enough." He moved to adjust the horse's saddle, checking its legs and hooves again. Clara watched him work, noticing the careful precision of his movements. Every action was deliberate, measured, born from experience and necessity. She had assumed he was only a warrior, someone capable of brute force. But now she saw the thoughtfulness behind his strength, the care in his decisions, the way he prepared for every possibility. This man was a protector, and she was beginning to understand just how rare that could be done as the canyon shadows deepened, and the first hints of wind rustled through the rocks. Clara realized she wasn't afraid in the same way she had been before. The riders might still come. Danger might still lurk around the next bend. But she had a choice now. She could stand with Cale, trust him, and face it head-on. And for the first time since her husband's death, she felt something that resembled hope. The canyon remained quiet, but Clara knew it would not stay that way for long. The riders were out there, moving closer with every heartbeat. But with Cale's oath echoing in her mind, she felt a strange steadiness, a courage she hadn't known she possessed. She was not alone, and that made all the difference. And in that quiet, tense moment, as the desert sun rose higher, Clara realized that survival was no longer just about escaping. It was about trust, partnership, and the beginning of something neither of them had expected. A bond forged in danger. Loyalty and the harsh beauty of the Wild West. The wind howled through the narrow canyon, carrying dust and the distant sound of hoofbeats. Clara crouched behind a jagged boulder, her heart hammering so violently she feared it might betray her presence. Cale stood a few feet away, his eyes scanning the ridgeline above, his posture calm yet taut, every muscle coiled like a spring. The riders were near closer than ever, and the shadows of their dark hats streaked the sunlit rocks like fleeting threats. "You must stay low," Cale said quietly, glancing back at her. "The rocks will hide you, but one wrong movement could give us away." Clara nodded, her fingers tightening on the small tin box tucked in her shawl. Its contents were still a secret to her, but now more than ever, it mattered. She realized with a pang of determination that she couldn't simply hide behind Cale. She had to help, had to fight in her own way if they were to survive. Cale signaled to the horse, who had been tethered nearby. Its dark coat blended with the canyon shadows, its muscles ready for the moment of need. Clara watched him move with effortless precision, sliding a knife from his belt, scanning the trail, assessing every advantage the canyon offered. He was methodical, deadly, and utterly focused, a man who had lived his entire life on the edge, surviving where others would falter. The first rider appeared over the ridge, and Cale's eyes narrowed. "Stay behind me," he commanded, though there was no harshness, only certainty. "They will not take you." Clara's pulse spiked as the rider spurred his horse forward, unaware of the trap ahead. Cale's movements were almost imperceptible. A subtle shift, a step to the side, a low whistle, and the horse bolted from its cover with a sudden, powerful surge, cutting off the lead rider. The man reined in sharply, startled. While Cale dropped from his cover and met him in the open, Clara felt a surge of adrenaline and fear. She wanted to run, to hide, but the sight of Cale confronting the rider, moving with strength and precision, ignited a courage she didn't know she possessed. She slid out from behind the boulder, clutching the tin box. Scanning for opportunity. Another rider appeared, heading straight toward her. Her mind raced. She remembered the loose stones at her feet and the narrow passage Cale had indicated. With trembling hands, she kicked a small rock into the path of the approaching horse. It stumbled slightly, enough to slow the rider and give Cale the opening he needed to incapacitate him with a swift move. Her breath caught, but Cale shot her a glance brief, approving. "Good," he said. "Stay close." Clara followed, moving with him through the narrow canyon passage, dodging rocks and leaping over crevices. The riders tried to regroup, shouting curses. But the canyon favored Cale's knowledge of every turn, every shadow, every hidden ledge. They reached a narrow ridge, Breakneck Ridge, as Cale had named it in passing, and the fight intensified. Dust kicked up around them, the sun glinting off knife blades and the occasional flash of gunpowder from Cale's revolver. Clara's fear had not vanished, but it was now tempered by action, by the realization that she could contribute. She used every ounce of courage, hurling stones to distract riders, guiding Cale toward advantageous positions and moving with him in perfect rhythm. Each time he glanced at her, she saw acknowledgment, not surprise, not condescension, but respect. The lead rider, seeing Cale and Clara working together, tried to flank them from above. Cale anticipated the move, guiding Clara to the opposite side of a boulder and positioning the horse to block the path. When the rider came into view, Cale struck with a precise combination of knife and strength, sending the man tumbling over the ridge into the canyon below. Clara's stomach lurched at the sight, but Cale's calm presence reminded her, survival required focus, not panic. Another rider came, and again Clara acted, kicking stones and yelling to draw attention, giving Cale the upper hand. Finally, the last two riders, exhausted and beaten by the terrain, the canyon, and Cale's tactical skill, retreated, spurred by fear and confusion. They disappeared over the distant ridgeline, leaving the canyon eerily silent except for the rasping breaths of Clara, Cale, and the horse. Cale exhaled slowly, lowering his knife and holstering it. He looked at Clara, and for the first time, a faint trace of a smile softened his otherwise stern expression. "You fought well," he said. "You were brave." Clara, shaking and covered in dust, managed a weak smile in return. I didn't fall," she admitted, half in disbelief, half in triumph. "No," Cale said, his voice steady. "You did not. And that makes all the difference." The adrenaline ebbed slowly, replaced by a mix of exhaustion, relief, and a strange, warming connection. They had survived together, not just by his skill, but by her courage, her quick thinking, her willingness to act. The canyon, once a trap, now felt like a sanctuary. And for the first time since her flight began, Clara felt that survival wasn't just possible, it was probable. As long as she had Cale by her side, as the dust settled and the sun dipped lower, casting the canyon in long, protective shadows, Clara realized that she had been tested and had passed. And in passing, she had discovered a new strength within herself, one she had never expected to find. The canyon was quiet, almost reverently so, as if it had absorbed the tension, the dust and the fear of the last day. Clara leaned against the horse, her hands still trembling from the fight at Breakneck Ridge, her clothes torn and streaked with dirt, her hair tangled by wind and adrenaline. But beneath the exhaustion, a strange sense of calm had settled over her. She had survived. They had survived. Cale stood beside her, scanning the ridgelines one last time to ensure the riders were gone. The wind tugged at his buckskin, whipping strands of dark hair across his forehead. He looked every bit the part of a man who belonged to this harsh, unforgiving land. And yet there was a gentleness in his eyes as he glanced down at Clara. She met his gaze and felt something shift inside her, a quiet recognition that this man, this towering, silent warrior, had become more than her protector. "You did well," Cale said, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable note of approval. "Bravery like yours is rare." Clara swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. I couldn't have done it without you," she admitted. Her fingers brushed against the tin box she still carried close to her chest. It had been the reason for all the danger, but in Cale's presence, it felt lighter. Less like a burden and more like a trust she could share. "You carried more than just the box," Cale said softly, his tone almost private, meant only for her. You carried courage, and that made the difference." For a long moment, the two of them stood in silence, listening to the canyon's quiet hum, the distant cry of a hawk, the whisper of wind against stone, the gentle pawing of the horse. Clara realized that for the first time since her husband's death, she felt safe. Not just in body, but in spirit. And that safety came not from the canyon, nor from the horse, nor even from the fight they had just survived. It came from Cale. "Where will we go now?" Clara asked, her voice low, almost hesitant. She had fled for so long that the idea of planning a future felt strange, almost frightening. Wall. She could still hear Cale's even breathing, the occasional snort of the horse. For the first time since her world had turned upside down, she dared to imagine that she might live and that someone might be there to see her survive. The canyon was still. The desert night stretched on. And for now, Clara was no longer entirely alone. The first light of dawn barely reached the bottom of the canyon, painting the jagged cliffs in muted shades of pink and orange. Clara stirred quietly, careful not to wake Cale, who still slept against the horse, his silhouette broad and solid even in the dim morning light. For the first time since her flight began, she felt a tiny measure of safety, but the awareness that danger was still out there gnawed at her like a persistent thorn. She glanced around the alcove, noting the subtle ways the canyon sheltered them, overhanging rocks that hid them from distant eyes, shadows that shifted with the rising sun, and the narrow paths that could only be crossed by someone who knew them well. Cale had led her here with the skill of a man who had spent a lifetime in these lands. She realized she owed him far more than a passing gratitude. He had saved her life. Her gaze fell to the small tin box she still carried in the folds of her shawl. She had been clutching it close to her chest for months, never letting it out of her sight. It was small, unassuming, but its contents were priceless, not for money, but for the secrets it held. Her late husband had entrusted it to her, telling her that it must be protected at all costs. Clara's throat tightened as she remembered the last words he had whispered on his deathbed. "Keep it safe. No one can know until the time comes." Now, with Cale beside her and the desert stretching empty around them, she realized the truth. She could not keep the secret forever. It was what the men were after. That tin box was why her barn had burned, why her husband had died. And now it had made her a hunted woman. Cale stirred, sensing her movement. His dark eyes opened, sharp and observant. "You are awake," he said quietly. Clara nodded, trying to hide the trembling of her hands. I need to tell you something," she began, voice low. "Something important." Cale's gaze softened slightly, though his posture remained ready, alert. "Then tell me," he said. She hesitated, gripping the tin box as if it were the only anchor in her world. It's what the Riders want. My husband left me a box. Something he said I must protect." "Hi," her voice broke. "I don't know what's in it. Only that they'll kill me to get it." Cale's expression hardened, the softness vanishing like morning mist. He moved closer, kneeling beside her. His hands hovered near hers, careful not to touch, but present. "Then you will not be taken. Not while I am here." Clara's eyes filled with tears she hadn't realized she'd been holding back. "But you don't even know me," she whispered. I'm just a woman alone. You have no reason to do what is right?" Cale finished for her, his voice low and steady. "I know more than most about being hunted, about surviving in a world that would see you disappear without a thought. You are not just a woman. You are someone worth protecting. And if the Riders come for you, they will face me first." Clara wanted to argue, to protest, but his certainty left her silent. The weight of his words settled in her chest, pushing down fear, replacing it with something she had not felt in a long time, trust. Cale stood then, moving to check the horse. The morning was still cool, and the air smelled of wet stone and desert sage. Clara followed, hesitant but compelled by a growing sense of reliance on the man who had taken her into the canyon, who had guided her away from death. She realized she had to decide whether to continue keeping her secret locked away or to share it completely, to place her trust fully in Cale. When she looked up at him, Cale's eyes met hers with an intensity that made her stomach twist. It was not desire, not yet, but a recognition of shared danger and unspoken connection. He was not merely saving her body from harm. He was beginning to shield her heart, too. "You are not alone," he said quietly, almost as if he were reading her thoughts. "Tell me what I must know to keep you safe. Every secret, every detail." Clara swallowed hard, gripping the tin box tighter. She wanted to run, wanted to hide, but the canyon behind them, the empty desert ahead, and Cale's unwavering presence made her feel as though she had no other choice. She nodded slowly. "All right," she whispered. "I will tell you. But you must promise me that I survive this." Cale placed a hand lightly on the box, not opening it, but signaling his protection. "I promise," he said, and there was no room for doubt in his voice. The sun climbed higher, casting long beams into the canyon. Clara knew the riders were still out there, somewhere beyond the walls, moving closer with every passing hour. Yet with Cale at her side, the fear that had haunted her since her husband's death no longer felt insurmountable. She had a plan now, and more importantly, she had someone she could trust to see it through. The tin box pressed against her chest felt lighter, not because its contents had changed, but because she no longer bore the weight alone. For the first time in weeks, Clara dared to hope that she might survive, and that the secret she carried might remain safe in the hands of someone who understood the stakes and understood her. The canyon echoed with quiet determination. And in that echo, Clara realized that her flight was no longer just about survival. It was about trust, about partnership, about finding strength where she had believed none existed. And as she glanced at Cale, she knew that together they had a chance. The canyon walls were bathed in a golden glow as the sun climbed higher, and yet the beauty of the desert did little to calm Clara's nerves. Each sound, the faint scrape of stone, the distant call of a hawk, even the sigh of wind through the rocks kept her alert. She had grown accustomed to danger since her husband's death, but now it felt sharper, closer, more personal. She wasn't just running from thieves and land grabbers. She was running with a man who carried the weight of a past she could only guess at, a man who had chosen to stand by her despite knowing nothing about her. And somehow, that terrified her almost as much as the riders themselves. Cale moved with quiet precision, leading the horse deeper into a narrow side passage. The canyon walls here were higher, jagged, and twisted into sharp angles that created natural blind spots. It was the perfect place for someone familiar with the terrain to hide, but nearly impossible for a stranger. Clara followed, gripping the saddle horn, trusting him with a faith she had barely allowed herself in months. "You must understand," Cale said as they paused in a shaded alcove, "that the men chasing you will not stop. They are ruthless, and they will do anything to take what you carry." Clara nodded, swallowing hard. "I know. That's why I didn't tell anyone before now. I couldn't risk it." "You've done well to survive this long," Cale said, his voice low and unwavering. "But now we must ensure you survive the next hours. And for that, you need to trust me fully." Her stomach nodded at the seriousness of his words, but she nodded again. I will. I promise." Cale's eyes softened for the briefest moment, though there was still steel in them. "Good," he said, "because if the riders find us here, I will not let them touch you. I will fight them, all of them, even if it costs me my life." Clara stared at him, struck by the intensity of his vow. It wasn't a casual promise. It wasn't a polite reassurance. He meant every word, and she could feel the weight of it pressing down on her chest. "You don't even know me," she whispered. "Why? Why would you do that?" Cale stepped closer, placing one hand on the horse's neck, the other hovering near her shoulder, not threatening, but protective. "Because I know what it's like to be hunted, to be alone, to have no one who will stand for you. You are alone in this world, Clara May. Not anymore. Not while I am here." The way he said her name carefully, deliberately, with respect and recognition made her pulse race. Fear, gratitude, and something more she couldn't name swirled together in her chest. She realized that she wasn't just relying on him for survival. She was beginning to depend on him, in ways that made her uncomfortable and oddly comforting all at once. Cale motioned toward a narrow ledge above the canyon floor. "From here, we can observe the pass below. The riders will think the trail is clear. We can choose when and how we engage." Cale's eyes softened, and he offered her a rare, small smile. "We go where the land allows us. Somewhere safe where you can rebuild. Where no one will hunt you for what you carry." Clara nodded, feeling a warmth she had not expected. The thought of a future simple, peaceful, yet shared, made her chest ache with a mix of hope and fear. But for the first time in weeks, she believed that hope was real. The canyon walls opened gradually into the rolling plains beyond, golden under the afternoon sun. The horse stirred, shifting its weight as if eager to carry them onward. Clara climbed onto its back again, steadier this time, her hands confident. Cale lifted himself up behind her with ease, the weight of him reassuring rather than intimidating Dot as they rode together across the sunlit plains. Clara allowed herself to glance at Cale. He didn't speak immediately, but she sensed his presence like a shield, a promise unspoken but deeply understood. They had faced death, danger, and uncertainty together and had emerged intact. "Stronger for it, you know?" Clara said after a long pause. Her voice quieter now. "I never thought I'd live to see another sunrise. And now I can't imagine facing it."